Hello and welcome to the Wedding Dish Podcast. Grab your fork and knife and take a seat at our table as we dish on all things weddings. You'll hear stories and tips from real couples and wedding pros about love, life, and entrepreneurship. I am Sarah Alpin, your hostess with the mostest on the Wedding Dish Podcast, and I'm also the CEO of Photos from the Hardy and District Bliss. We do have our little French bulldog friend Clouseau in his podcasting chair, like in my lap, terrified of the Roomba. Poor choice on my part, but he is absolutely here for you all this week. Before we get started, if you haven't listened to last week's episode, definitely flag it and check it out after this. We met with Happy Dance Hats. That it was so fun. They do custom hats. You'll love the episode. It's such a great guest activity and gift for them. So thank you everyone for tuning into the Wedding Dish. Today, I am dishing with a speech writing business that specializes in unique and customized speeches for weddings and other special occasions. I would like to welcome the human behind A Speech to Remember, Holly Blum. Thank you so much for joining me on the Wedding Dish today.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
I'm so excited. This is going to be such a fun conversation. Wedding speeches, they can be so great. They can also fail so epically, and they can be really anxiety provoking.
100%. All of those things are absolutely true.
And you don't want to let your friend down or, your guests down if it's at your wedding, all of those things. So I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your expertise.
Absolutely.
All right. So what are the most important ingredients for the best wedding speeches?
That's a great question and a really important one. I think the first one is having structure. So like all the best stories, the best speeches have a clearly defined beginning, middle, and an end. So the beginning in your introduction, you're really setting the tone for the speech. The middle is really the meat where you're sharing the specific stories, memories, and anecdotes that are going to really bring the characteristics of the bride and groom to life. And then it's up to you what you do with your ending. You can be as creative as you want to be. But generally, I like to encourage people to have a strong structure and a theme or a thread that ties through the entire speech so that it really sounds cohesive and not stream of consciousness. The next thing I'd say, and it goes along with the structure, is rhythm and flow. You want your speech to mirror the way that you talk so that it's not a formal, stiff presentation. It really is like a polished conversation. So paying close attention to transitions and ways you're moving in between thoughts and from one story to the next are really important. I think a lot of times people do sometimes sound stream of consciousness. And if your speech feels like that, chances are it is like that. So playing with those transitions and seamlessness so that it flows well is really important. I think another thing is authenticity, because at the end of the day, you have been asked to give this speech because you're you, and you want your speech to reflect who you are as a person. So if you are a naturally funny person, then your speech should reflect that. But if you're not, or you're not comfortable with jokes and that doesn't feel like who you are, then don't try to be a stand-up comic. I think the most important way to give a speech that has impact is when it actually reflects who you are as the speech giver. The stories and anecdotes that I mentioned earlier in terms of the middle, those are extremely, extremely important. I think people have a tendency to use a lot of adjectives and descriptive words to talk about the bride and the groom, but a lot of times those adjectives can fall flat. So it's really about showing and not telling, and using, stories and anecdotes to bring those adjectives and descriptors to life.
Yeah, I think these are such great points. I didn't mean to cut you off. If you have more, please. These are great.
No, I only had one last thing, which I think is one of the biggest mistakes people often make, but that is so important, is to be mindful of the time limit. I think, and also if you know that you're going to be one of many speakers, then your speech needs to be even shorter. So I generally say stay within the 2 to 3 minutes, 5 minutes max, absolute max, because naturally, no matter how gifted of a speaker you are, no matter how great your speech is, people just tune out after 5 minutes. So the trick is you want to leave the guests wanting more and not less.
I could not agree more with all of these things. But the time limit thing, I think a lot of times couples forget to give people time limits.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you haven't planned and if you know you're a tangent person, write it down. Because if you're going to go on a tangent, you're definitely going to run on borrowed time. And it can, going over time can really start to feel like a drag. And as a photographer, I start to see it in guest faces. And it always makes me really sad because it's like an important story to the person telling it or the couple or both. And then they've gone way over. So, and our attention spans got shorter during COVID.
Agreed. The last wedding that I went to as a guest, the groom side of the family, it was like the mom, dad, and two brothers. So it was three separate speeches. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that they were up there speaking for 45 minutes. And it really, everybody was looking at each other sort of like, when is this going to be done? There was a lot of redundancies across all the speeches as well. So that's another thing. Like if you know that you're one of many speakers and you have close relationships with those people, make sure that you guys aren't saying the same things over and over again. It really interrupted the flow of the whole celebration. There was so much less time to eat and talk and socialize and dance. I mean, they had this like magnificent 12-piece band. I don't know what the band was doing during the speeches. And it was a wonderful wedding, but the speeches definitely, went on way too long.
Yeah. And you don't want to be the speaker who then someone is saying this about later, or even just thinking about later, because you can't, like, it is kind of rude to get up during the speeches in a way. Like you can do it, but it feels rude to like stand up or to like go get a drink. Like you've now run out of your wine by 45 minutes that you had.
Exactly. Right. And even eat it, it was during dinner. So we were, you didn't want to be rude eating the whole time people were up there. But, it definitely does happen. But you're right. Brides and grooms, hopefully are taking the initiative to give the people who are speaking on their behalf a clear idea of, okay, at this point, I want you to be done. And sometimes, I think in this family's defense, they had just so many nice things to say.
Yeah, I know. That's when it's heartbreaking.
And people really do. Yeah, people really want to do right by them. But this is, it doesn't have to retell the wedding speech, regardless of your relationship with the bride or the groom. It doesn't have to tell the person's whole life story. You're giving them a window into who these people are, what your relationship is with them, but it's a snapshot. It's not like a full in-depth investigative report. which these speeches were. Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's true. And I think, it's always best of intentions. And that is one of the reasons that it kind of stinks, which is why I'm glad you brought it up. It is really important. So for all of our couples listening, tell your speakers who the other speakers are so that they can talk to those people if they want to, or so they just know what that person might talk about. And also tell your people what the time limit is. And I mean, I would say 3 minutes is probably more than enough.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I think that, there's nothing to say that a bride or groom can't provide expectations for the speech and even set some ground rules for what is really should be off the table. Like people, I think in particular, they want to be funny. I think there's like this pressure, this like unwritten rule, like you have to be funny and you have to get everybody laughing. And a lot of people who are less gifted in terms of putting the jokes out, they think that if they share embarrassing stories or inside jokes, that's going to make everybody laugh. And more times than not, that's usually the opposite effect. And I always tell people, you want to pick material that is going to resonate with everybody in the room, regardless of their age, their gender, how long they know the person, how long, what their relationship is with the bride and the groom. Because nobody, like those inside jokes that really nobody gets except, the bride and the groom, maybe those embarrassing stories that are so inappropriate and cringy, like nobody really wants to hear that. So I always tell people, tell them like, if you aren't comfortable with your grandmother hearing this information, then just leave it like out of the speech altogether.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And I think, to your point, also setting expectations, if you're having your parents do your welcome speech, it could be years since they've been to a wedding. It could be like when, I don't know if you remember this, but someone did it recently and it like sent me way back to the 80s or like the early 90s. Whenever I went to the first wedding I ever went to as a child, where the catering manager would stand up and talk about like, and give like a little pitch speech. And they would
I've never experienced that. That must have been interesting.
It's so strange. They don't know the couple like that, but they always would say they spared no expense, which reminds me of Jurassic Park, which is why I specifically remember it. But your parents may not have been to a wedding since then. So you may need to tell them what the welcome speech is. They might not have any idea what that looks like. They may stand up and say, we just want to welcome you to the wedding, and here's how to get the food. Or they may stand up and treat it like a real toast. So you definitely, if you have specific check boxes for your speakers, communicate that to them and define what it is. If it's a toast, it's different than the welcome speech. Or it's not, if that's your preference. If you want to have like a mini toast with the welcome, sure. Great way to get people involved and break up the speeches, to be honest. But
100%. I've also seen, and I don't know if you've experienced this too, it seems like that there is a trend that they are, a lot of modern couples are keeping speeches on the wedding day more limited. They're only asking maybe like 2 or 3 and using the rehearsal dinner as that venue for whoever wants to kind of get up and talk. So I think there's a little bit more liberty probably during the rehearsal dinner if you go over a little versus the wedding day, which, most are planned down to the minute, and to, go over by 10, 15 upwards of that, it really does mess up with the flow of the event.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great way, to still give people a platform to share and to, let them express their love if that's important to them. But then, it isn't 45 minutes of speeches. Not to go back to that. But how would you recommend people go about making sure their speech doesn't sound generic?
It's so important. I think nobody wants to give or hear that same old speech that they've heard again and again and again. And those are usually, when that does happen, those are usually those cringy moments, or it winds up just feeling so bland that you like can't even remember what the person said the next day. And since the goal is you want your speech to be remembered for the right reasons, there are lots of ways that you can make it so that it's less generic. So you can play with the structure. I think like what you were saying earlier about the catering manager having that formulaic speech, a lot of people stand up and they go, "Hello, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Holly, the groom's sister." It's like one of my biggest pet peeves when you start off a speech like that, because everybody, if they don't know who you are or the MC doesn't introduce you, like they're going to be able to figure it out within a matter of minutes, if you're doing your job. And so because there's such a limited real estate in what you're saying in a speech, you want to start that speech like in a way that draws everybody in from the very beginning. You don't have to start your speech with thanking everybody that you want to thank. You don't have to thank everybody at all. You could thank them at the end. You could thank them throughout the speech. You want to kind of think a little bit creatively in terms of the structure of your speech and the information you're sharing and how it all connects. Like that's a surefire way that the speech is going to be unique to you and to the bride and the groom, rather than kind of using, a do-it-yourself outline that you find on the internet. And now I'm sure a lot of people are turning to chat, and even those speeches like the chat written speeches, they do follow a certain, formula and cadence that is not necessarily reflective of how you as a speech giver actually talks. Again, like going back to that idea of the polished conversation, like it's very hard to get that chat to replicate that for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think like if you use cliches, you're going to sound cliche. So if you can, if you can stay away from like, oh, you were meant for each other, or like those little ball and chain jokes, like anything that sounds cliche is like going to make yourself feel like and sound generic. Those stories and anecdotes, that is really the heart of the speech. So you can avoid that sort of laundry list of adjectives that might come out. And again, you're trying your best to use that descriptive language to your advantage, but you really want those stories and anecdotes to do that descriptive work for you. And that really adds flavor and color to your speech that you're not going to find in your like template, everyday generic speech.
Those are great tips.
Yeah. So those are some ways. Yeah. And sometimes it's easier said than done. But if you put enough time and thought and preparation into actually writing out your speech and then really spending the time on the back end rehearsing it, it really can go a long way into making sure that you're, hitting all the right notes.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any final tips for how to best prepare to deliver a winning speech?
The most important thing is practice. Practice, practice, practice. Like, be prepared. I know it sounds obvious, but the more you practice, and by practice, I mean read the speech aloud over and over again, the more of a fluency you're going to develop with the speech, so that once you get up there, you're going to feel that much more confident and comfortable with the speech because you will have put in the work beforehand. The less the ums and the uhs and the likes and the awkward pauses are going to come in because, again, you've practiced, you've honed, you've made it so that you're talking the speech, not reading the speech. Like that's the goal. Like you want to get to the point where it sounds like you're talking it, it's not a formal presentation, and you're not there because you have to convince people that the bride and groom love each other. Everybody in the room wants to hear what you have to say. It's there for like a celebratory, joyous moment. So the more you rehearse, whether it's like in front of a friend or a family member or recording yourself or even talking in front of the mirror, the more you're going to sound like yourself. Like people sometimes think, oh, well, like the more I practice, it's going to sound scripted. It's not going to sound authentic. But in reality, it has the opposite effect because you'll know the speech and be so much more comfortable with it, when you get up there to actually deliver it, it's going to really sound like almost spontaneous rather than that you memorized it. So the rehearsal and the practice is the biggest thing that people can do to give themselves a leg up.
Love that. Yeah, perfection. Well, thank you so much, Holly, for joining us on The Wedding Dish today. Where can people find you online?
So you can find me at aspeechtoremember.com. I'm also a Speech to Remember on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm also on LinkedIn just under Holly Blum.
And we will link in the episode description. So if you're driving or doing something right now, don't worry, we've got you. You can swing over there and grab that information. And while you're giving Holly a follow, you can follow us at the Wedding Dish Podcast on Instagram, and you can find us at theweddingdishpodcast.com. Give us a follow, rate, and review on your preferred podcast platform. We love to hear from you all. We love some good feedback over here. And again, Holly, thank you so much for joining me today. This was such a great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Until we meet again, cheers.